Hello and welcome to another edition of Personal Health and Fitness. I'm your host, Chad Marshak. Our program today is going to be on a movement screen that we do here at Body Symmetry. So anytime we have a new client that comes to see us for fitness training or any type of athletic development or injury that they might have, we do a movement screen and assessment. And essentially it's kind of like a fitness evaluation, but it's our own concoction, if you will, of different types of things that we're looking at in an individual to kind of have a better understanding, a better appreciation of how they move. So we're looking at people essentially from head to toe. We're looking at joints to check range of motion. We're looking at for muscle imbalances that somebody has, and everybody has a muscle imbalance. We're looking at a variety of things just to help us understand and appreciate, again, how someone moves, so that when we create a program for somebody, we're not going at it in a blind manner. We're really trying to take that information from the movement screen and apply that to our programming so that we come up with something that is kind of not only what they want to do, but also what they need. And we help people identify some of the inconsistencies in their own body so that when we put this program together, we're not going to hurt them. We can help them get to their goals much quicker, much faster. So Kevin, who's a trainer here at Body Symmetry, is going to help me with the movement screen today. The goal today is to kind of share with you some of the movements or some of the things that we're assessing, kind of from head to toe. So Kevin, go ahead and kick off your shoes and we'll get going with things. The first thing that we typically look at is we'll do a gait analysis, but before we do that, we like to look at individuals' feet. So if you've ever been to a physical therapist, they'll typically do their own assessment. This is a little bit different than that. Ours is essentially from head to toe. We're looking at, again, joints and how they work, but most people don't come to us necessarily with an injury. Maybe they have something that hurts, maybe a joint hurts, like maybe their shoulder, they have a glitch in their shoulder, or they have something wrong with their hip, or somebody oftentimes will have like mild plantar fasciitis. If they come to us with something, a major red flag, then we typically kick them to a physical therapist and orthopedic physician that can help them specifically. So we know our scope. We're not trying to take over from physical therapists. We're really trying to put a new spin on how you would assess somebody that has a particular fitness goal in mind. So we start with the feet. And most people have either a foot that's going to overpronate or it's going to supinate. Most people have feet that flatten out or overpronate. So we'll ask them to do a single leg balance. So Kevin, go ahead and just balance on your left foot. So not only are we looking at the foot, but we're also looking at the hip. And if somebody has good balance, you're going to see that their hips are on the same plane. If the foot's working properly, if the hip's working properly, their hips are going to remain square. Oftentimes what we see people that have weak lateral hip rotators. So the hip will kind of dive down. So one side of the hip will fall down lower than the other hip. They may be able to actually maintain their balance, but the strength in the hip or lack thereof, we can actually see that if the hips don't remain square. So we'll test both sides, right side, left side. And again, I'm not only looking at the foot to see if it collapses, but again, the hips and if they remain square or not. So I'll record that information. We have a nice little form here. We'll record that information in terms of the time they can do that. Any inconsistencies that we see through the hips or through the foot, or even for the knee that matter, if their knee dives in, then we know they've got something probably going on in their hip as well. So after we do that, we'll have somebody actually do a little gait analysis. So just walk about halfway down towards the camera, Kevin. Kevin's a trainer here at Body Symmetry. And walk back towards me. So we look at individuals from head to toe. So we'll usually have them take a couple of spins up and down the length of our room. And some of the things we're looking at, we're looking, again, at the position of their feet, the direction that their knee is pointed, how their hip is functioning, if they get good extension through their hip. That's good, Kevin. Extension through the hip is when you're during gait, when your leg swings behind you. A lot of people, when they walk during gait, they walk out in front of themselves, essentially, and they don't get good extension, meaning that they don't push off, they don't really use their gluteal muscles effectively. So the distance, if my foot here, I'll use this as a reference point, the distance with my stride pattern should be if this is the midpoint, my stride pattern moving forward should be the same as my hip going behind myself. So if you actually would measure the midline of your body and measure the distance from your stride going forward, which is hip flexion, then into hip extension, the distance between those 2 points ideally should be the same. 9 times out of 10, most people are more dominant moving forward during the leg swing action with hip flexion, not with extension. Most people, as they get older, don't use their gluteal muscles as well. Whether they're tight through their hip, they're tight in their hamstring, if their glute just doesn't fire properly. So we're trying to identify that movement flaw and document that information so that, when we go back and we start creating a program for somebody, then we can duly note that and make sure that we assign proper exercises to address that movement flaw. So that's the gait analysis. Again, I'll look at them up and down and then from the side too. So those are the first 2 things that we do. Next, we'll look at somebody's posture. So go ahead and face the wall, Kevin. We'll look at Kevin from the side here. So Kevin's a young guy, so he doesn't have a lot of flaws necessarily. But as we get older, a lot of times what we'll see when we're doing a postural assessment is that they've got an anterior head tilt. So the anterior head tilt, oftentimes the chin kind of dips forward and the arms internally rotate, which is going to cause a lot of issues typically in their neck and their shoulders, their thoracic spine, through their pelvis. So if you've ever noticed somebody who's older and they've got kind of a rounded upper back, almost a Dowry's hump, their head looks like it's plastered on the front of their chest, where they're way out here like that. They're internally rotated in their shoulders, so they kind of look like the Cro-Magnon guy that has, their arms out in front like so. So that usually, those issues create pec minor, pec major tightness. Usually a lot of neck issues where the deep cervical neck flexors become weak, which help to keep the head centered over the axis of the spine. The other thing it's going to create oftentimes is that you tend to lose that lordotic curvature in your lower back. Kevin's got a nice even position with his head. His head's not anteriorly positioned. His shoulders are positioned nicely at his sides, where his shoulder joint, elbow joint essentially is aligned with his hip joint and his knee joint and his ankle joint. So you've got this nice line here. The other thing that you don't see with Kevin is he's got a nice thoracic spine where it's not kyphotic, where he's really rounded forward. He's got adequate lordotic curvature in his lower back. We're looking at that. His hips are pretty even here. I don't see one hip necessarily higher than the other. His knees, again, pointed straight ahead, feet pointed nicely straight ahead. I'll ask somebody to stand, and oftentimes you see this, where their feet are off. You've got one shoulder lower than the other shoulder. Their head's anteriorly tilted off to one side. So you've got a lot of mechanical flaws that many people possess that create a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain. And then when they go to exercise, if you don't correct those things, it's going to make matters worse. And you have to think of the body like you would a car. When a car is out of alignment, you've got a suspension issue, then the tires are going to wear unevenly. What's going to happen when you drive that car faster? Well, typically, you've got more of a control issue. If you've ever driven a car that has an alignment issue, you've got uneven tread wear, then matters become worse when you drive that car faster. The same thing happens with the human body. When you've got mechanical deficiencies or movement flaws, muscle imbalances, postural issues, then when you try to drive that car faster, i.e. exercise harder or start an exercise program, then you're going to start to break down. Those joints don't like it when they don't function properly. So that's when you develop issues. So that's essentially our postural assessment. Good job so far, Kevin. Okay, so now that we've done our gait analysis, we're going to go into a waiter's bow. The waiter's bow is going to assess upper hamstring length. So go ahead and face the wall, Kevin. Nice shirt, Kevin. So I want you to bend forward. So you're going to bend forward at your waist. So if you want to try this at home, you can see how much or how little a hamstring flexibility you have. So Kevin's not rounding his back, he's looking down at the ground. He's done this a few times, so he knows how to do it properly. But he's got a nice flat back here, nice hamstring length. Go ahead and stand up. So we'll ask somebody to do this say 3 to 5 times. what we're looking at is upper hamstring length. Sometimes when people have excessively tight hamstrings, they may only be able to get to this point and they can't get any lower, although they will try to cheat and round their upper back to gain more range of motion. Well, I can go down and palm the ground by rounding my upper back, but that doesn't necessarily test true hamstring length. You want to keep a flat back, bend forward at the waist, and 90 degrees of trunk flexion, which is what I'm demonstrating right now, is normal, adequate upper hamstring length. Some people might be here. Maybe they only have about 45, 50 degrees of upper hamstring length. We note that information, put that down. So you can check yourself. If you have low back pain, chances are a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, the hamstrings are especially tight, the upper hamstrings especially. So after we look at the upper hamstring length, we make, again, notes pertaining to that. We're going to look at spinal extension range of motion. So go ahead and lie face down on your stomach. So now we're looking at the ability to extend the spine in a prone position. So that means just lying face down. So this is a McKenzie press up. If you've ever had back issues, if you've been to a physical therapist before, this is often prescribed exercise to help alleviate certain types of back discomfort, specifically low back discomfort. So you're going to place your hands on the floor and you're going to straighten your elbows, lifting your chest off the ground, but attempting to keep your hips in contact with the ground. So Kevin's got really good spinal extension in his lumbar spine. So let's say don't go up so far. So some people have limited range of motion. Kevin's demonstrating maybe half of loss of use of range of motion in his lumbar spine. If you can only push it up this far, you feel like you're locked here or especially tight in your abdominal muscles, go ahead and extend your spine all the way up again. But Kevin doesn't. He's got really good extension here in his lumbar spine. Some people may feel really tight through their abdominal muscles, oftentimes short. If people do a lot of crunches or really strong upper abs, or maybe because of their occupation, they can't fully extend their spine because their abdominal muscles are so short, so tight, that they pull the rib cage down towards the pelvis. So that can create some problems. So we'll note that information. So you can check that out. Okay, Kevin, so that's the spinal extension range of motion. Okay, next we're going to look at Kevin's quadricep length. So the hip flexors and the quadricep muscles oftentimes on individuals are really short and tight. So for Kevin, I'm going to take a half roller, place it on the ground, and I'm just going to bring his knee, or flex his knee, bring his heel down to his butt. And I kind of want to get to a point where I feel kind of that inner range where it doesn't want to, maybe I can get his heel to his butt by pushing, but where his leg kind of stops here on its own, which is about right here, which is about 110 degrees of knee flexion roughly. So there's 90 degrees, 100, 110, and I would record that information. There are a lot of people that can only get to 90 degrees of knee flexion on their stomach, and their quadricep muscles are so tight and their hip flexors are so tight that it really creates issues for, again, for the lower back or with gait or just movement in general. So again, we're really just trying to assess range of motion and all the major joints and see what type of movement they have. So next I'm going to look at internal and external rotation of the hip, and I would just stabilize his pelvis here, bring his leg in, and take it out, and again, record that information. A little bit tight here, huh, Kevin? Yeah. Yep. So the hips, the lateral and the medial hip rotators, the muscles in the hip that help to internally and externally rotate the hip. The femur kind of moves, this big long bone here moves in the hip joint, the acetabulum, this big, giant, powerful muscle, your butt. A lot of times those muscles become really short and tight and create, again, problems with how somebody moves, creates issues with pain in the lower back or their hips, and even with the knee if you have limited motion in the hip joint. How you doing, Kevin? All right, so go ahead and roll over onto your back. Okay, So we've looked at the quadriceps. Now we're going to look at his hamstrings, the lower hamstring length, in a supine position. So that just means he's going to lie on his back and he's going to bring his leg up. The job here, I see people sometimes stretching their hamstrings in a gym or wherever, and this leg typically comes off the ground and this leg comes all the way up and back, and they're stretching here and they're like, oh, look how flexible I am. Well, that's because your pelvis is rotated backwards. If you keep this leg down, straighten this, now I already know Kevin's tight here, and bring this leg up. Now ideally we want to get to about 85, 90 degrees of hip flexion. And he is probably about 75 degrees. I'm not using a goniometer, I just eyeball it. I don't have to be that exact. But he's definitely tight in his hamstrings there. Let's look at the other one. And sometimes you'll see individuals, maybe you, actually have one hamstring that's pretty flexible and another one that's really tight. That can create even more problems. So if there's a big discrepancy between right versus left, if you're measuring length and muscles, then that can make matters even worse for your body. Okay, Kevin, we're going to look at your shoulders next. So the other thing that we look at in people, and oftentimes if you're going to a class at a gym, there are a lot of different classes that health clubs have. I see a lot of, especially the larger classes where they have one instructor. Not everybody's built the same, and most people have issues. So if you are an instructor and you're watching this program, it's not a bad idea to do a quick screening process even before a particular class, and just, shout out to the class, to the attendees, who's having issues with their shoulders or their back or their hips today. And just kind of duly note that information, because modifications are key, and oftentimes instructors aren't giving that information to their class participants, and they're making matters worse. So a lot of people have rotator cuff repairs, which oftentimes after that you're going to have limited motion in your shoulders. A lot of people have low back surgery or knee surgery or hip replacements, and they're participating in these classes, but the screening of those participants is not as thorough as it should be. So sometimes people get hurt because the instructors don't know about it. So you've got to be aware of those those little problems that you have if you go to a class, and tell the instructor what's going on in your body. Give them a heads up, because oftentimes the instructor is going to be able to modify a particular exercise so you don't get hurt. So now we're going to look at internal and external rotation. So I'm going to just fix his shoulder here, just push his humeral head down, and then I'm going to let Kevin drop his hand down towards the ground as far as he can on his own. And so he's got about, roughly 45 degrees of internal rotation, maybe a little bit less, which isn't bad. I've got probably 10 degrees in my unhealthy shoulders. And externally here, can you get your wrist to the ground? He's got good normal range of motion here. A little bit tight probably in his pecs from doing too many bench presses over the years. Does that hurt? No, it's because you've been using your lacrosse ball. So again, looking at right and left side, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but he's got good motion here through his shoulders. Definitely tighter on his right side with internal rotation. And that's very common, that most people have, especially in the shoulders, if their dominant side usually has less motion than their non-dominant side, especially if you're a throwing athlete or an overhead athlete, or you've done any type of repetitive overhead activities, whether it's sport or with your occupation, or just stuff at home for that matter, that a lot of times the motion is compromised on that dominant side. And so most people don't really know how to stretch their medial or lateral shoulder rotators, but really important to have nice healthy range of motion, or at least get it as good as you can get it so you don't get hurt, and it preserves those joints for a lifetime. All right, so let's look at what else do we have on the floor here in terms of our range of motion test. Okay, go ahead and stand up, Kevin. So the other thing that we like to look at range of motion wise, backside against the wall, let's go ahead and do the overhead lat stretch, is how much range of motion somebody has in their lats, or again, lack thereof. So for this test, this lat stretch test, you're going to position your pelvis against the wall, drive your heels into the ground. Your heels are going to be about 6 to 8 inches from the wall. Flatten your upper back against the wall. You're going to place your hands together, and it's essentially a pass-fail test. Can you palm the wall, keeping your lumbar spine, your lower back, glued to the wall? Kevin does a pretty good job, both sides. He's a little bit tight. And let's do that 2 more times. Let's see if that loosens up a little bit more on the second one. Is that a little bit better? Yeah. So we'll have an individual do this, say, 3 times. Usually on the third one, they can get a little bit more range as those lats lengthen a little bit more. But the lats are big, strong, powerful muscles, and oftentimes the people that have if their lats are too short, which means they're typically really strong and they're tight, they're going to have problems with motion in their shoulders. They're going to have problems a lot of times with low back pain, low back discomfort. So too many people overstrengthen their lats. They overshorten them by doing way too many pull-ups or way too many pulling exercises where they develop a muscle imbalance. And one of the things, again, what we're looking for here is we're trying to figure out what muscles are out of balance. Which muscles are too short and tight, and which muscles are too long, or you have too much range of motion, which typically means they're weak and inhibited. They don't really do their job. So you want that nice healthy balance of muscles that are appropriately strong but appropriately long so that you've got good motion. All right? A lot of your Olympic athletes have their own, the Olympics just ended, have their own physical therapist, their own, fitness trainer that works with them on a regular basis. And usually they're looking for any type of a movement flaw, any type of a muscle imbalance, and they zap it right away to keep these people working, at high functional levels. All right, next we're going to look at mid-back motion. So this is scapulohumeral rhythm that we're looking at just to see how the shoulders work in relationship, just basically the whole shoulder girdle region working. So you're going to flatten your back against the wall, glutes against the wall, arms at a right angle, and you're going to slide your arms. This is a wall stretch here. Thank you, Bridget Cutler, who taught me this years and years and years ago. So this is going to assess proper motion in the mid-back. A lot of people cannot even get to the wall and get their wrists against the wall, all right, and maintain that position. So the scapulohumeral rhythm, the relationship of the humerus to the scapula and how they work together as a team to raise and lower your arms. All right, and Kevin's worked quite well, but I suspect when you're an intern here in the beginning, I don't think that his motion was quite as good as it is now because he's doing the things he needs to do to counteract some of the things he probably shouldn't have been doing, or at least too many of the exercises that probably weren't right for him. How'd that feel? No issues? Good. Okay, so that was the mid-back wall slide. All right, we're going to do a couple of things strength test-wise and kind of give people an idea what's going on with their body and how to develop or what to look for in terms of proper strength. So go ahead and lie face down on your stomach. So we do a scapular movement test, and this is part of the movement screen that we're trying to assess lower and middle trapezius strength. So rest your forehead here, and this is more of a pass-fail test. So we're going to place Kevin face down on his belly. He's going to place his forehead here on this half roller, and he's going to see if he can lift his arms off the ground and hold that, say, for 30 seconds. So a lot of people don't even have the motion in their shoulders or their strength in the lower middle traps to flex their shoulders and get into this position. So if it's somebody that's relatively strong that doesn't really have any movement flaws that I can pick up on, then I may press on them a little bit, so hold your arms here. So, and just see how much symmetrical strength they have in their right and their left side. He's got pretty good strength. His right side's actually a little bit weaker than his left side. You see his right side, you can't see it probably, but I can feel it, wants to dip down a little bit more so than his left side, which he's got good strength. And that goes back to that motion in his shoulder or lack thereof in his right side. He didn't have really good internal rotation on his right shoulder. So when I get him into this position, it kind of comes out a little bit more. So there are specific exercises that I would have him do, especially in the beginning, to kind of correct that muscle imbalance to address his lower middle traps. Okay, go ahead and stand up, Kevin. So that's for the lower middle traps. A lot of different strength tests that we have people do depending on what their goals are. So we'll sit down with an individual, we'll talk about their specific goals, what they want to accomplish. We'll talk about all their orthopedic limitations, their health history. We gather a lot of that information first, and then we also use that as a tool in conjunction with the movement screen and assessment to kind of, again, put a proper program together for somebody. So it's a lot of data compilation in the beginning that we're trying to, bring all that together so that we create the best program for that person at once. All right, so next, let's go ahead and do a strength test or just demonstrate that split stance isometric squat. So the next test that we would have somebody do is a split stance isometric squat. We just do this for like 15, 20 seconds. So go ahead and just drop your right knee down to the pad. All the way down. Okay, now you're good right there. So I'm going to remove this. Let's just kind of measure his depth. So now we're going to do a split stance isometric squat. And we're just going to look at this we'll measure the amount of time that he can actually do this and maintain his balance, of course. So he's driving that forward heel down into the ground. And again, we're doing this for time. So he's going to go to failure. You don't have to go to failure. You can go ahead and stand up now. But we would check the right and the left side. I've tested people where they can do it, say, for 2 minutes on one side and maybe 1 minute and 15 seconds on the other side. So that's statistically a big difference. And so that's a pretty big muscle imbalance between the right and left side. So maybe that individual has a hamstring and a hip that's not nearly as strong as the other side. Or maybe they're really quad dominant on one side and that quad wants to work harder than the glute and the hamstring. So we've got to note that information again, and that again goes back into helping us create a proper program. One of the other things that we test with people, and we're running out of time here, but for a lot of athletes we'll do vertical testing. This is just a jump measuring platform that gives us a computerized measurement of somebody's vertical. We'll check broad jump. Again, depending on the individual we're working with, if somebody's 90 years old and comes to see us, then we're not going to necessarily have them do that particular test, but it's really about dialing that individual in for what their needs are and what their goals are, and that's how we test people. So again, hopefully you have a better appreciation for what a movement screen is all about, and you can use that information hopefully with your own exercise program to help you get better. So thanks again for joining us, joining me, Kevin too, on another edition of Personal Health and Fitness. If you have any questions about what we do here at Body Symmetry, check us out at bodysymmetry.com, or definitely go to our cool website, freefitnessvideos.com, which has over 700 exercise videos on a host of different things you can do for your body. Until next time, I'm your host, Chad Marshak.